Black and brown culture is the most influential culture in the world, full stop. My keynote's over, we can go home now, turn up the lights.
The lights.
Wrap it up.
No, but seriously, right, this is not a new concept. You know, there are a lot of people in this room that, you know, are in the marketing industry. We're in conference rooms, we're beating the table, trying to convince our clients, our colleagues, how we need to center black culture within the cultural conversation, right? And how we drive trends and we create influence. And, you know, some people accept it and some people are like, for sure, it makes sense. We're seeing you show up in culture, we're seeing what you do. And then there's some people that are not so easy to convince. And I kind of get it, I understand it. In its concept, it's inherently exclusionary. There's certain people that may feel like, well, I contribute to culture. What about my community, right? But let's just examine the receipts for a little bit, right? So let's look about the industry of fashion. Pharrell Williams, the great late Virgil Abloh, currently the creative directors of arguably the largest luxury fashion house in the world. If you took black cultural contribution out of fashion, that industry would implode. Okay, so you're still not convinced. Let's talk about music. I think you guys have been seeing the wall graphics that we have and we placed, and we specifically were focused on spitting facts, but black culture has created pretty much every form of popular music in the world. We've created jazz, we've created reggae, we've created rhythm and blues, which gave birth to rock and roll. Of course, we created hip hop. So, well, maybe you need more convincing. All right, hold up, let's talk about sports. I don't even want to go into it too deeply, but when you think about our contributions to sports, and if you took the black athlete out of the sports industry, what would that industry look like, right? So when you start thinking about our fashion, our music, our sports, our contribution, film, television, our language, our colloquialism, it's undeniable that we just have incredible influence. So the question marketers shouldn't be asking is if black culture is the most influential culture in the world, but how has it become the most influential culture in the world? That is the question if we can answer in the boardrooms, in the conversations, and we can decode it, codify how culture happens, then we can actually engineer culture on behalf of our clients, right? But when we dig into how, this is where the paradox really comes into play. How has the most underprivileged, under-resourced, and downright oppressed community become the most influential in the world? Because we're taught to associate influence with privilege, right? The most educated people, the athletes that have access to the best coaches, those are the ones that are going to succeed. But we constantly see the black contribution in culture defy the odds based upon the resources that they're provided with. So our oppression walks hand in hand with our influence. So I'm gonna say that again. Our oppression walks hand in hand with our influence, right? We all heard the old adage, right, that necessity is the father of invention, or the title of today's talk is Black Lemonade. Well, black people are the best lemonade makers on the planet, right? And what if I was to tell you that's because every cultural trend in America is socioeconomic in origin? Not some of the trends, every one of the trends. And when we examine why and how culture works in America, how culture is created in America, you have to first understand what culture is in America. Culture in America in one word. Anybody have a thought? What comes to mind? Anybody shout it out?
Super Bowl.
Super what? Super Bowl?
Super Bowl football culture.
Okay. Okay, no, let's get bigger than that. Okay? What affects everybody culturally in America? Capitalism. Somebody said capitalism. Culture in America is capitalism because America is a business, okay? Think about it. People don't come to America for blue jeans and burgers, right? They come for progress, ambition, the American dream, the pursuit of a better life. We associate America with social advancement. We are taught from day one to consume that status, right? That success is our indicators of how we're advancing across that spectrum of success, how we are progressing, right? That's what we are conditioned to believe because America wants us to consume. They want us to chase that status. They want us to chase that goal, right? And so everybody in America is on an axis, and I call this the survivor's axis. Everybody in America is going from surviving to thriving, right? And unfortunately, black people historically have been on this side of the axis, right? And so there are attributes that are endemic to those who exist or are born into different states of this axis, right? So survivors are born from struggle, where thrivers are born from privilege, okay? Survivors create to include, right? To share, which is why black culture is the most inclusive culture in the world, because we have to share our contributions in order to move across that spectrum, because we're trying to get the validation from the thrivers to empower our expression so that we can advance in society, right? Survivors create, thrivers distribute, which is why we create but don't own shit. We are given art because art is free to develop. Art is innate, it's in all of us, right? You don't need an expensive school to be artistic, to have a point of view, to express yourself, to improvisationalize, right? Where thrivers are taught that success is synonymous with academia, right? Which is why you see a lot of our contributions, based on what I articulated in that first slide, being concentrated in the arts, right? In sports, right? Because it doesn't cost a lot of money to put on some running shoes and go and run, or pick up a basketball and go to the neighborhood court down the street. But that is where, again, our oppression fuels our influence, because we take the tools that we're given and we turn it into a beautiful expression. So let's look at some of these theories in application. Streetwear. So when we talk about the socioeconomic roots in streetwear, streetwear is a $200 billion industry. Black people created streetwear, don't get it twisted, okay? So when you look at the pants sagging, it comes from the prison system. In prisons, you were not allowed to wear belts for suicide risk, or they could be weaponized. So it became a way that prisoners had to walk around, specifically in Rikers Island, because you actually were allowed to wear your regular clothes in Rikers Island. And then they came home and they just adopted and kept the same style. And then it just became popularized within their community. Baggy jeans. I don't know, I grew up without much, right? I had cousins that had clothes, didn't always fit me the right way, but I had to make it work. How many parents bought you a extra large coat and was like, you're gonna grow into it, right? Right? Because you had to make it work. Or if you had multiple brothers or siblings in the household, you shared clothes even if you wasn't the same size, right? And so when your clothes didn't fit, you had to make it work, right? That's the socioeconomic reality of the origin of streetwear. Okay, let's talk about DJ culture. Okay, you think Clive Campbell, Cool Herc, had enough money to go down to Sam Ash or one of these super expensive consumer electronics stores or Best Buy and figure out how to keep music going so he can keep the party rocking? No, he had to work with what he had and invent a way of stringing music together. Calvin Harris is worth $300 million. There's not one black DJ that cracks the top 10 earners in the world we created DJ culture out of a project room in the Bronx. Let's dive deeper. Sneaker culture, $100 billion a year industry. Do you know sneaker culture has roots in gang culture? If you Google right now, Dope Man sneakers, the Nike Cortez will come up. Eazy-E had a song called Dope Man, right? And that was these sneakers right here because they came in blue and red colorways. So the Bloods and Crips were able to utilize them as part of adorning their uniforms in South Los Angeles, right? And then it became a staple of personal identity. The reason why it was affordable. You could buy a pair of sneakers for $30, right? But you also had to make them last, so you had to make them special because you didn't know when you were going to get another pair. So if someone stepped on your sneakers in the hood in New York City, it was on. So because you had to go get, we were people walking around with shoe polish to put scuffles on. You remember that? So let's talk about something more global. We all heard the term the beautiful game, right? Where do you think that term comes from? Okay. This picture is one of my favorite pictures. It's Pelé doing his famous bicycle kick. The first time you ever saw anybody attempt something that athletic. There is a term called Jenga. And Jenga means sway. And it comes from an Angolan form of martial arts called capoeira, right? And capoeira was a martial arts that slaves in Brazil actually used to free themselves, right? It was a fighting style that they used to free themselves. But it was also a way of moving. It was a way of life. It was rhythmic. So when black players started to play on the field with other white European players, and there was a Eurocentric style of playing, they would get fouled more than their white players. They would get hit, and the refs wouldn't call it. So they had to basically cross you over and get nice and figure out how to move around you without getting fouled. And they brought in those capoeira style of influences to their style of play. Now everybody is trying to move like Pelé. Everybody's trying to adopt Jenga. So when we start thinking about culture, right, culture in America is not homogenous. We're a heterogeneous society that's filled with so many different races. So when there's one central idea around culture and it doesn't fit, culture starts to fragment. Because culture is all about creating belonging. Moving from surviving to thriving is all about creating belonging. We're all trying to create belonging. That's why we're here today. Because we're trying to create belonging. So what's amazing about what's happening right now in this identity economy is culture is starting to splinter, right? And so when you don't have anything and you want to belong, you create subculture. And then subculture creates counterculture. And that's why you have so many different ways, and marketers are struggling trying to figure out, yo, how do I talk to everybody? And they're so different, and they vibe so different, because everybody's on their own survivors to thrivers journey. Your survivor to thriver journey is, I may want more followers, right? Or I need to eat tonight, all right? So there are different extremes on how you value your quest for belonging. So culture is not what you attach yourself to. Culture is what you contribute, right? So when we think about culture as a contribution, a brand's role in culture should be to advance consumers or society in a meaningful way, okay? Don't borrow equity, build your own. That's what we do, right? From surviving to thriving. Don't just associate with culture, advance it. So if you don't have a cultural point of view, but there's something cultural happening that's endemic to your brand ethos that you can fan the flames on in an endemic way that's authentic to your brand, that's where you need to invest your time, resources, attention. And then finally, so many people focus on the moment. How many times have you been in a room, hey, what are some cultural tempo moments we should attach ourselves to, right? Where brands like Red Bull is like, no, we're gonna create a movement around our brand ideology and create a pull strategy. Now that might take longer to develop, but over time it creates its own self-perpetuating value. So as you start thinking about cultural engineering, go from moment to movement. And remember, when life hands you lemons, all right. There you go, brother.